Well, they didn't get 5 commitments this weekend, but the official visit weekend that just passed did produce 1 new commitment for Pitt. 1 is less than 5, but there's probably a good reason for that, of why Pitt didn't have quite as much success, quite as much immediate success on the official visit recruiting weekend this past weekend, as much success as they had the previous weekend. But they did get 1 commitment, and he's by far, well, maybe not by far, but he's certainly among the most interesting recruits we've seen Pitt involved with in this cycle. Who did Pitt get a commitment from? What happened with the other 5 guys they were targeting, or 6 guys they were targeting on the official visit this past weekend? And who could they land that they didn't close on over the weekend? We're going to break down this past weekend's official visits, the new commitment, the other targets who were here, and everything else around Pitt recruiting as we head into a new week here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, the official visit weekend came and went with just 1 new commitment. A bit of a drop-off, I would say. I don't think anyone would deny that. From last weekend when they got 5 commitments on Saturday, that one was one where you really felt that recruiting momentum rolling. For that visit weekend, they had, 14 guys on campus. 4 of them were already committed. Out of the other 10, they got 5 to commit. And so that was obviously a successful official visit weekend. This past weekend, they brought 8 guys to campus. 1 of them already committed. So out of the other 7, they got just 1 commitment. Now, to some extent, I mean, we talked about this a little bit last week. We talked about it on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. We talked about it right here on the Morning Pitt. We talked about it on the Wednesday night live show with Jim Hammett, the live Panther-Lair show here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We talked about how maybe the expectations for this past weekend, maybe should be a little bit lower than they were for the the first official visit weekend. I mean, there's basically 3 official visit weekends that Pitt's going to host this year. They had one that was June 6th through 8th, which was 2 weeks ago, effectively. There's this past weekend, which was the 13th to the 15th, and then they have one more coming up here, 22nd to 24th, or 20th to 22nd is the 3rd official visit weekend of June. And, I think for a variety of reasons, we thought that maybe this past weekend, this 13 to 15 weekend, would be a little bit quieter in terms of commitments than that first weekend was. And primarily, the biggest reason for that is that every guy who came in, all of the uncommitted guys, that we knew of, and as we previewed the weekend, and we thought there would only be 7 recruits visiting, 1 commit and 6 uncommitted targets. They snuck in a bit of a surprise visitor that we weren't really counting on, and it took a little while to track that down and find that whole story. And so we'll talk about him in a second because he ended up being the commitment. But all the guys that we knew about going into the weekend, they all had additional official visits planned. Now, ideally, I'd like to sit back and say, well, that's great, but if you do your official visit right, if you recruit well, you'll be you'll get a kid to just change his plans. He'll just love your school so much he'll just drop the other official visits, and then that will be that with that, and it'll all be over. And that's the ideal. Yeah, that's how you would like all those official visits to work out. But I think when you get to that second official visit weekend, all the guys that are coming in have probably taken an official visit the previous weekend to some school. And so if they've made it out of that official visit without committing, and then they're coming to your school on weekend number 2, and they have other official visits planned, the fact that they made it to weekend number 2 and they're still taking visits means they're probably somewhat committed to the idea of taking all their visits, or taking 3 visits or 4 visits or whatever they have planned. And so I think that was the case with most of these guys. And yeah, there ended up being a guy or two who canceled their remaining visit. There was one guy who canceled his remaining visits after this past weekend, after visiting Pitt this past weekend. He canceled his remaining visits and committed to Syracuse. I almost did the thumbs up too long, and I was going to get the rainstorm. It's not quite a rainstorm that a recruit committed to Syracuse. That's just kind of happening this year. But I think for the most part, these guys who go into the second official visit weekend are pretty set on taking an official visit on that next weekend as well, and maybe even the fourth weekend in maybe even the fourth weekend in June, because there'll be the potential for another visit. I think they could take one that weekend of the 27, 28, 29, 30, that stretch right there. I don't think it goes into a quiet period yet. Or a dead period. I'll have to check that. But either way, these guys want to take those additional official visits. And so we thought that it would be a little bit quieter, thought there might be fewer commitments, thought they might still get one or two, and they ended up getting one. And it ended up being a guy we really didn't know about. And, sometimes, I think we do a pretty good job at Panther-Lair.com with the Pitt coverage, the football, the basketball, recruiting. I think we do a pretty solid job covering all that stuff. I think we do a pretty solid job getting as much information as we can and, bringing it to you and putting it all on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. And, I think we're good. I think we're like I said, I think we do a good job. But we still miss on things. And we missed on a visitor the first weekend, Juju Robinson, who ended up committing. And we missed on a visitor this second weekend. And this time it was Acam El Nagi. I believe that's how you pronounce it. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his name, Acam El Nagi. He's an offensive lineman from England. He's attending the NFL Academy in Loughborough. That's one that's probably the way you pronounce it. I think he's originally from Bristol. Played rugby. He's a big offensive lineman, a 6'6", 295-pound offensive tackle prospect, and he was not on our radar. It's funny because Pitt had a lot of international recruits at their prospect camp 2 weeks ago on the 9th. And there were a lot of kids from the NFL Academy. NFL Academy is an initiative of the NFL to sort of spread the game globally. They have one in London. I think they opened another one in China in the last couple of years. And it's a high school, and they try to make it a full academic high school, demanding academic program and all that. But but it's football. It's American football with NFL hired people running the football program to help identify and develop some of the best American football talent overseas. And so there are a bunch of guys from the NFL Academy at Pitt's prospect camp 2 weeks ago, or last week. I mean, depending on how you want to look at it, 10 days ago, 8 days ago. But this kid, Acam El Nagi, was not one of them. He was not one of the players who came. He just came in for his official visit to Pitt this past weekend, which makes it even more interesting and a little bit more off our radar. If he had been here last weekend, maybe we would have gotten an eye on him, and he would have been on the radar a little bit. But they still sneak him in sometimes. They still have these surprises, and it ended up being a big surprise because he ended up committing. Now, El Nagi was committed to Eastern Michigan. He decommitted or announced his decommitment apparently while he was on his official visit to Pitt. And, committed before he left on Saturday. He also had offers from Virginia, Akron, Florida A&M, and Campbell. I mean, look, if you take a guy who's been playing American football for 2 years, a guy from overseas, a 6'6", 290-pound offensive lineman who's still learning the game and is still very raw, there's a little bit of a lottery ticket. You're probably not going to see a lot of offers on his sheet because it's a bit of a lottery ticket. And that's what Acam El Nagi is. Now, I think there's a lot of upside there. I think there's a lot to like. I mean, look, if it hits, if he's able to translate to this game, and I think he's been playing for about 2 years, so he's still learning this game. But if he's able to keep growing and keep developing, if he's able to translate his natural skills and athletic ability to this game, and playing in America and playing Division I college football, which he won't really be counted on to do in any meaningful contributing way for 3 years, 4 years. So he's got time to continue developing. But if it hits, I mean, it could hit in a big, big way because, I mean, you watch some of his film and you watch his athleticism, the rugby background and all of that. At his size, you're like, wow. There's something to work with here. I think Jeremy Darvo looked at the film and said, wow, there's something to work with here. We could make something happen. And again, if it works, if it happens, if it clicks, he could be awesome. He could be really, really good. But it is a lottery ticket, right? And lottery tickets are either going to have a huge jackpot and payoff, or it's not going to be worth anything. And that's sort of the risk you take with a lottery ticket, right? And that's the risk you take with a lottery ticket prospect. And you try to play the odds as well as you can. You try to find as many intangibles as you can, as many identifiable things. You can say, okay, these are some of the traits that you usually find in successful players, guys who are able to make that transition, guys who are able to succeed and play effectively in college. And you say, okay, we've identified this many traits on this guy. We think there's a reasonably good chance of it paying off, or a reasonably good chance of hitting the jackpot here. But it's still a lottery ticket. Now, I think when you get a commitment from, a guy like this, when you get a commitment from a lottery ticket, sometimes fans feel like there should be a timeline on taking lottery tickets, and some of the response has been, you take this guy now, like this is the guy you take. And I think you have to understand that, like, just because a recruit might be a lottery ticket, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to wait until the end of the cycle to take them. If you feel strongly enough about his chances of paying off, you feel strongly enough about his chances of hitting, of that jackpot coming, then you take him when you're comfortable with it. You take him when you're comfortable taking him, right? And even if you take him now, that doesn't mean every other recruit you take at that position at the offensive line is going to be another lottery ticket. You might have some more quote unquote sure things that you can get with your final probably 2 offensive line spots in the class. But if you're comfortable with taking him now, if you're reasonably confident that he can pan out, then you take him now. You don't necessarily have to wait and say, oh, well, we've still got 1 spot left. I guess we can take this lottery ticket now. It doesn't have to work that way, and it doesn't necessarily mean you've expired all your other options along the offensive line. Now, with Acam El Nagi, it's going to take me a while to get that to roll off my tongue. They do now have 2 offensive line commitments. The other one, Shep Turk, the offensive lineman from Thomas Jefferson. Turk is more of a guard, an interior lineman. El Nagi is more of a tackle. He's going to play on the edge, and I think they want 1 more guard and 1 more tackle. I think they had some guards visit last weekend, each of the last 2 weekends now, come to think of it. And, or actually, Jordan Fields might have been an offensive tackle. Yeah, Fields is more of an offensive tackle. So they had a tackle visit this past weekend. They have, they've had some guards. They had guards visit last weekend. I think they've got some more. They've got some more guards scheduled to come, coming up. But I think they're about halfway there on their offensive line targets. Now, because you already took a lottery ticket, you'd like to avoid doing that with any of your final spots on the offensive line. But I think, all things considered, is this the worst type of recruit to take? I don't think so. I think it's a pretty good take, as a matter of fact. You don't want it to be, you don't want this to be the, high point of your offensive line class, unless, all of a sudden he makes a huge leap forward going into his senior year at NFL Academy. But as a part of the offensive line class, as a piece in the class, you could do a lot worse. And to some extent, I think if you're Pitt, look, everybody has to project when they recruit offensive linemen, right? I mean, there's so much, probably second to only quarterback in terms of having to make the biggest projections of what a guy is going to become in college. Where I think you have a lot of projection to do with quarterbacks, and I think you have a lot of projection to do with offensive line, and probably in that order in terms of the positions where you have to make the biggest projections. So there's always some element of that. But I think if you're a school like Pitt, and that vast majority of college sports that we always talk about, or the vast majority of college football that we always talk about, you're probably not getting those upper echelon, top tier, almost ready to play offensive line prospects. Those guys who come in and they are ready to play right away as true freshmen. Those guys who check more of those boxes to become more of a sure thing. You're going to be, if you're Pitt, you're going to be projecting to a certain extent. Like you'll get a Ryan Baer, and that's great, but you're also going to get guys where, you say, okay, we think in a couple of years this guy is going to be this. And you're saying that with all your recruits, but you feel reasonably confident about Ryan Baer getting there. You feel pretty confident about Caleb Holmes coming in this 2024 recruiting class getting there. I don't know if they felt that way about BJ Williams or not, at least when they recruited him. I think by the end of spring camp last year, they felt pretty good that he could contribute. I don't know if they necessarily wanted to put him in the starting lineup, but that's how it worked out. And now he should be better for it. But there's always some element of projection with the offensive line, but I think if you're Pitt, you are projecting a little bit more. And so if you're going to have to project anyway, if you're going to have to sort of count on what you think might happen, I mean, you could do a lot worse than a guy who's 6'6", 290 pounds, 6'5", whatever, 6'6", 290 pounds, and moves well like El Nagi does. So I don't hate the pickup. They obviously have more work to do on the offensive line. They took a pretty big class this past year, these kids who are coming in as freshmen now, and they're going to need, I think, some decent size, a decent-sized class for 2025. Now, what about the other guys on the visit? Shep Turk was here. He's one of the offensive linemen, one of the offensive line commitments. And then otherwise, there were 6 other recruits who were committed. Now, Quante Gillians, the defensive end from Rochester, he's one I referred to earlier. He took an official visit to Boston College in May, went to Syracuse 2 weeks ago, Pitt this past weekend, was planning to go to Michigan State this coming weekend, came out of the Pitt visit, canceled his Michigan State visit, said he was going to commit soon, and ended up committing to Syracuse. So Pitt misses out on that one. Syracuse recruiting well. Fran Brown doing a great job. I mean, we'll see what happens when they get into the season, but he's certainly recruiting very well. So that takes one guy off the board, leaves 5 more. There's the 3 defensive backs, Cole Woodson, Sean Lee, and Josh Gurrier. The linebacker, Bryson Williams, and the offensive tackle, Jordan Fields. Fields, very high on Pitt. After the official visit, he already visited Toledo. He's going to go to Kansas and Houston before he makes his commitment, probably on July 1st. I think Pitt's in great shape there, but Houston is something of a hometown school for Jordan Fields, and Kansas will try and make the Big 12 sell on Fields. And unfortunately for Pitt, he's going to be moving further and further away from that Pitt official visit. The further in the memory that you get, I think the tougher the chances get. It doesn't mean they're ruled out. I think they made a really positive impression on Fields. They're just going to have to keep those relationships strong, keep in touch and contact and communicate, and try to close the deal when the time comes after he takes these other visits. Kind of the same thing with Josh Gurrier. Took an Iowa State visit 2 weeks ago. Pitt this past weekend. He's going to go to South Florida and Iowa coming up. He's a safety from Florida. Prospect I think the Pitt staff likes a lot, and now they're going to have to hold off South Florida and Iowa in order to get his commitment, which I think is also on July 1st. He liked his visit, but he's committed to taking these other visits. And so he held off on committing. Kind of the same thing for, well, not necessarily the same thing, but Cole Woodson, a safety from Virginia, went to Duke last week. He's going to take the in-state or in-Commonwealth visit to Virginia this coming week. Probably make his decision after that. I think Pitt, again, did well, and I think they have a lot to sell when it comes to safeties and defensive backs. But, you're going to have to hold off Virginia, which is obviously going to have proximity to sell for him. Sean Lee, the cornerback from Harrisburg, I think there's probably a pretty good chance of Pitt landing him. He took a visit to Iowa State. He was planning to go to Connecticut after his Pitt visit, but that's kind of up in the air. He's not sure if he's going to take that visit or not. I think because there could be a commitment coming soon, and in which case, if it does come soon, I think Pitt's got a pretty good shot of landing him. We actually thought he was the commitment on Saturday. Still have some sources saying that maybe he was. So we're kind of keeping an eye on that one. I think Pitt's got a really good shot with Sean Lee, one of the top athletes in the state of Pennsylvania. And, they would like to get all 3 of those defensive backs, Lee, Gurrier, and Woodson. But got to start with one. And Lee might end up being it. But all these guys, and Bryson Williams too, looking to visit, the linebacker from Michigan. He's looking to go to Michigan State next weekend, wants to take another visit before he commits. And I think a lot of these guys will commit by the end of June or maybe mid-July at the latest, but they want to take these visits. They want to take 3, 4, 5 visits so they have something to compare. And if you're Pitt, I mean, you did your best. You rolled out the red carpet. You tried to show them what you could do and what you have to offer. And now you don't sit back and wait because you need to stay in contact with these guys. You need to be on the phone. You need to make calls. You need to do all those things. But to some extent, you kind of got to sit back and wait. I know they said you don't sit back and wait, but you kind of have to. And that's just what it is right now. So one commitment from a guy we really didn't know much about. We're going to keep gathering details and information on him over the next few weeks, or the next few days, next few hours, and then a bunch of guys that they're going to be waiting on. So I don't know what the Pitt staff expected out of this official visit weekend. Like I said, I didn't think they would get a ton of commitments this time. I don't know if the Pitt staff thought they would or not, but they didn't. And so, I suspect they'll have greater success next weekend. They have more guys coming in, and for a lot of these guys, it's going to be their final official visit weekend in June. So I think you might see some more guys pull the trigger, and then I think you'll see them get some guys from this past official visit weekend here in the next couple weeks. So recruiting is still very much going strong. And, there was a big prospect camp yesterday. Well, not big in terms of numbers. There weren't a ton of guys in the South Side, but there was some really good talent. Let's talk about that tomorrow, all right? So do me a favor, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you never miss any of our Pitt video content. Football, basketball, recruiting, whatever it might be. You can find it at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, and message words to talk to other Pitt fans. So like this video and subscribe. You never miss anything on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We got lots of great Pitt content for you there. So thanks for tuning in today. I hope you had a great weekend. I hope you had a great Father's Day and all those other things that you might have done this weekend. We appreciate you tuning in this morning or this afternoon or evening, whenever you watch this video. We'll be back for another episode of Pitt Recruiting Talk tomorrow on the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.